we were living in a bus, my entire very large family. We were performing all the time. We were filming for TV. We eventually had our own television show, which was supposed to showcase kind of the behind the scenes of this large touring family. There are other large families on TV, but it was what we were doing and how we were doing it, which was kind of the subject of people's interest in the TV show and all of that. And I would say like the crux of my story is that the way it was portrayed on the outside and, showcased on television, all that public version of the story was really not the full story. And of course, the parts that were left out of the story were really dark, really toxic, and very secret, very shameful.
This show is all about helping you up-level your life, including your well-being, your relationships, your mental health, your wealth, your confidence, and your joy. I challenge you to keep an open mind as together we discover tips, tools, and advice from the experts to help you live life to your fullest potential. Welcome to the Jenna Banks Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's guest is Jessica Willis Fisher. And before I read her bio, I just want to give you a little trigger warning because we are going to cover topics such as abuse and sexual abuse. So just giving you a little bit of a heads up there in case you might get triggered. And I want to be sensitive to your needs as well. So that said, we don't go too heavy into that topic because her story is one of overcoming, of resilience, and she has so many wonderful things to share with us. And I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation with her today. Jessica Willis Fisher is an Americana singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and author who believes that sharing our stories with one another will change the world. Growing up the eldest daughter in a toxic and abusive household, she performed with her family band, the Willis Clan, until her departure in 2016 at the age of 23. A passionate advocate for survivors, Jessica lives in Nashville, Tennessee with her husband, Sean Fisher. Her critically acclaimed debut solo album, Brand New Day, was released on April 13th, 2022. Brand New Day is the first music Jessica released since her father was arrested for sexual abuse and is an artistic representation of her journey since then, showcasing a wide spectrum of the emotions that have come in that process of the last 5 years. Jessica's hauntingly beautiful and brave memoir, Unspeakable: Surviving My Childhood and Finding My Voice, was released on November 1st, 2022. Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really happy to have you here and looking forward to our conversation.
I'm excited to be here. Let's dive into it.
Let's do it. So you have had such an interesting, exciting, complex life. You've lived a lot of years for such a young person, I have to tell you.
I feel that way as well. I definitely, I feel like time can be an accordion. It expands and you can fit like so much. And sometimes you look at a year and you go, how did that much fit into 12 months?
Especially with a family like yours and a father who was so motivated and driven like yours to make your family into what became the Willis Family show and the music and all of that. I mean, gosh, that was just so much.
I look back and I struggle to really sometimes appreciate my past reality. It feels like a different life, almost like a different planet. Like there were a lot of different rules that, and one of the things was time. I looked at my schedule from being a kid and went, how did we do that? And one answer is like, I was 16.
Yeah.
And, it just makes me tired just looking at it now.
I can only imagine. So when you guys got to the height of your fame, I should say, what did that look like? What were your days like? Was every day rehearsal and you guys were going from city to city? What was that like?
Sure. I'll paint that picture a little bit. So my story, as you said, that was a great, complex is a great one-word summary sometimes. I'm the oldest of 12 kids, and we, I was homeschooled growing up, and slowly there were music, dance, all these other extracurricular activities that were added over time. And, like the public version of our story was that as our family grew larger and we kind of developed different abilities and talents, we eventually became a dance troupe and then a band, and we appeared on TV and different things. And so it just escalated over time. I would say, especially from the year like 2011, 2012, up to the 2016-ish year. Those were really intense years that were very different from all the years prior. I was born in 92. And so I was in my teen and early adult years during 2012, 2016. And we were living in a bus. My entire very large family. We were performing all the time. We were filming for TV. We eventually had our own television show, which was supposed to showcase kind of the behind the scenes of this large touring family. There are other large families on TV, but it was what we were doing and how we were doing it, which was kind of the subject of people's interest in the TV show and all of that. And I would say like the crux of my story is that the way it was portrayed on the outside and, showcased on television, all that public version of the story was really not the full story. And of course, the parts that were left out of the story were really dark, really toxic, and very secret, very shameful. And I carried that up until the age of 24. When things really got bad and my choices were really, I either get out of this situation or I probably will die. And I don't mean to over dramatize that, but it really was such a dark chapter.
Do you think that any of that darkness could have been detected on the show or on stage, or was it well hidden?
Well, let's go ahead and establish just generally what it is. My dad was abusive ever since I can remember, really in every way. He was sexually abusive. He became very violent towards the end. He was emotionally manipulative. And, emotionally, I had not been safe my entire life up until the age of 24 when I got out. So it's interesting. I do think I personally have had the very strange experience of looking back because there is so much footage, pictures. We were so public for those later years. There's actually quite a bit of material that you can go back and look. And for example, one of the craziest ones to me is my family was on the Today Show a number of times. And after we were on America's Got Talent, after we were in those kind of the initial, those couple years that we were kind of like B-level famous, I don't know. We were on the Today Show promoting our TV show, and the hosts are just sunny and happy. And they're saying to us, you can see, there's like 14 people standing there smiling. Little kids. I'm 23 at this point, 22, 23. And we're all just like doing the bit. We're a happy Christian performing wholesome family. And they say, like they were just saying a lot of times TV shows and reality is a train wreck, but you guys look so happy and wholesome. And my dad actually says to us kids in a joking way, but he goes, "You're faking them out. Good job, guys. Keep faking them out." And it's so like my stomach just clenches when I see it because to me, it was a in plain sight. But that's why you would never guess. And, I think my dad did give people a lot of really kind of creepy vibes sometimes, except we were what made it not.
I was looking at a picture of you guys the other day, and it was like an article, I think, a New York Post or something like that, with the whole family of 12. And I was noticing just that. He has this very solemn look on his face, and he's in the background. And it's all you beautiful, beautiful children and your beautiful mother smiling and just looking like the picture-perfect family. And there he is behind the scenes, just looking pretty solemn. And I was like, wow, that's really telling now that we know the full story.
And I think that's it right there, is it's really hard to parse out what is hindsight and what is not. Like watch all the crime documentaries, right? All the cult exposés and everything. And I look at, videos and pictures of the leader, and I just, I have this rage, and I'm just like, oh, I want to smash that person's face. Cause like, they're taking advantage of children and people and all of this, but that's me being told what this person has done. Right. And so I have that in my mind when I'm looking at this face. And I've had people tell me that they've had that experience with my dad, watching him, looking back, hearing the story. And I have had people tell me that before they knew anything, they had a weird feeling, or they questioned, and then now with hindsight, they go, I know what that was. But it was not something that I never really had the experience while I was still in that situation of someone coming up and asking or anything.
And here's the situation, like a gut feeling or a weird feeling, no one can really do anything about that, right? What are you going to say? Here's this picture perfect family. Something seems off with the father, but everything seems fine. What can anyone say? And I think that goes to family members too. I've heard that family members, they, and again, in hindsight, they go, wow, maybe I should have said something. But what could you do or say when no one is talking about it, when the kids aren't feeling comfortable enough to say what's happening? And so they get the feeling that there's something, but they don't know for sure. And so it's really tough. And by the way, you mentioned in your wonderful book, Unspeakable, which I'll show everyone now, this is a memoir, and it's so beautifully written. And I cried many times reading it. Very heartbreaking, and you recount your past in such wonderful, beautiful detail. But you mentioned that your father seemed like a cult-like leader, right? Like it was like a cult he was leading. That was an interesting perspective for sure.
And that would not have been a perspective that I had growing up. I actually had a friend who was, long story short, our families had crossed paths in a very short, very kind of strange way. And she's the oldest girl of a very large family. And she invited me to go to this cult conference, like helping people get out of cults, helping recognize that people are in cults. And I was sitting there just every couple minutes having this, shocking light bulb moment of revelation, of realizing this is really helpful in making sense of my experiences. And basically the way I view it now is, whether you would call my family a cult or not, we were in the incubator. We were like a little baby cult. Like if we would have given my dad 10 more years, that's 100% where we were going. He wanted to build a commune. He wanted to have access to all his grandchildren. He wanted to grow something and still be in control of it. And we thankfully don't get to see exactly how that would have gone down, but rest assured that was the path that we were on.
Well, thank goodness it didn't go according to plans. Yes.
Right. But a really helpful swath of vocabulary. And just recently I was learning about the bounded choice theory framework. I don't know if you know about that.
I don't. What is that?
One of the things that people struggle to understand about cults, or let's call it a high control group, because does a family qualify as a cult?
No.
It could be the case either way. But definitely a high control group, and definitely cultic tendencies. And what is it that makes something a cult? And, you kind of have the pillars of a charismatic leader, or a leader that has this power over their followers. You have these beliefs that set up a system, whether it's connected to like religious beliefs or some sort of transcendent sort of beliefs that set these different rules around this group. And then you have the actual rules of what you're supposed to do to belong to this group, and then the social pressures of between the people in this group. And those all apply for sure to my family. And I think it's interesting for people that are in toxic and meshed environments, whether it be a family, whether it be a workplace, definitely check that out. Look into, learn some of this vocabulary, because your eyes might be opened and you might realize that you're in an environment that has a lot of those characteristics. So that's continues.
I did not expect us to go down this path with the cult, talk.
Sorry.
But it's fine because I'm actually personally fascinated with that as well, because I feel like I was raised in a cult-like religious environment as well. Not that my family was a cult in and of itself, but just the what we were around seemed kind of like a cult-like fundamentalist type of belief system. But I'm fascinated with cults and understanding how do they form? How do so many people get sucked in? Like there was a cult called NXIVM. Did you watch any of the documentaries? There's at least 2 different documentaries that cover that cult. And it's just fascinating to see how it happens. And yet people really believe they're doing the right thing. And it's, yeah.
So that to me, that was actually the cult leader I was imagining in my head when I was referenced. I was thinking of Keith Raniere and how angry it makes me to see pictures of him. I think that there are still so many things. I think for the rest of my life, I will be looking back at my story and trying to make sense of it. Right. I'm also trying to live a happy, healthy life now. I don't want to get mired into obsessive, just losing more years of my life to being all tangled in that. That being said, I think there's so much to be gained from learning from the past, processing our stories, and sharing. And I keep saying story, but that's one of the main frameworks through which I view my past, view my goals and my dreams going forward. Obviously, I've written a book, so that's a very kind of typical way that we think of story. I'm also a musician. And so, art, songs are little 3-minute stories, 3-minute journeys that we try to articulate something we've been through. You've written a book. So, I think a lot of people resonate with the idea that we're always just trying to make sense of our story. We didn't sit down and write it, whether we believe there's a higher power that sat down and write it at some point. So much of our culture is around movies, TV, books, stories. So that being said, I think that when we encounter other people's experiences, me learning about NXIVM, for example, there were moments where I resonated and went, oh my gosh, someone also experienced something I experienced. Plenty of times where I went, whoa, that never happened to me. How wild and crazy. But I think that's the magic of doing our work as in understanding our own story, but then sharing it with others. I just really believe in the power of looking at our own stories and then sharing them with others. And there's so many reasons why. But when we are brave enough to look at all parts of our story, that's when we are really stepping into our power and responsibility that we have. What are we going to do with this one life that we have? And, we've already kind of referenced, I was in my early 20s. I was 24 years old. And not to trigger anyone, but again, to paint a picture, there's this beautiful picture on the outside. But that hidden picture was being physically assaulted, mentally and spiritually abused, told that I was following Satan, that I was not allowed to have my own feelings and desires and wants, and I was trying to leave God's will, all while gaslighting me that I was the problem when I was literally being criminally abused by my father for decades. And to wake up and go, how did I get here? I did not choose this, but how have I let it get to this state? And so I really resonate with people who also have dealt with abuse, have been groomed, have grown up in cults and things like that, because it's really crazy making. Term I found in therapy, lots of terms I found in therapy. And it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that you are in a bad place. And then it's kind of a two-edged sword to realize it's on me to change this. Can be such a heavy burden. And it's the only thing that gives you power, because if your safety depends on someone else, there's nothing you can do. You're dependent. And as a child, you are dependent, truly. And at some point, depending on if you have the courage or what your actual circumstances are, at some point you have to reclaim, I am in charge of what happens to me. I am responsible for myself.
Yeah. And you were the oldest of 12 kids. Like that also had to feel like an incredible responsibility, you know?
Yes, I think that's an interesting one in that to some degree, I try to shed this feeling, but a part of me says I'm not a good sister, or I wasn't a good sister because I really didn't necessarily feel like I should mother all these other children. I know a lot of other girls in large conservative families kind of dealt with that. I would say my version was I felt responsible for my mother, and I had been trying to protect my mother from day one.
Well, she was being beaten and abused like horrifically, right?
She eventually was. And I talk about early in my book, one of my earliest memories of going, something's wrong with the world, with my story, was realizing that mom took care of all of us kids, mom took care of dad, but nobody took care of mom.
Yeah.
You know, and women were supposed to give, and caretake and never be seen, be supported, be safe, be loved. And
that's
that's
how your dad raised you guys to think, right? That was a woman's place, is to do that, or where did that thinking come from?
I definitely think that, you know, initially, because we were homeschooled, we went to a church where my grandpa was pastor. It was quite insular. Yeah. And lots of little kids are. It's, you know, whatever your home life is, that's your biggest influence, for better or for worse. For me, not going to school, not being around other, you know, exposed to other things and other systems, that continued really far, and not in a normal way. That being said, now that I am out of that system, I do think a lot of greater religions, my religion was Christianity, but a lot of conservative philosophies and worldviews do double down on the idea that women are the caretakers of children, the caretakers of men, the caretakers of home, the caretakers of everything's on them. And they're really not supposed to expect much of anything themselves.
So now that you know that, how do you feel about that? I'm really curious to know how your perspective has changed now that you've come out of this traumatic situation, heavily indoctrinated, programmed, conditioned, right? And had to basically work to undo a lot of those belief systems. How do you feel about that now?
Sure. So I talk about in my book, I am so grateful and will always be so privileged in that I was supported so much when I leaped out of my situation, and definitely was caught by a safety net of kind people that didn't even really know me that well, and were just there to support me. I got some really great trauma therapy, some experiential therapy programs, all this stuff really quickly. And I think that absolutely is why I'm probably even alive, certainly why I'm here, and why I have the strength to share my story and all of that. So first of all, thank you to all of those people and everything. Secondly is I talk about a bit about at least the beginning of my recovery and healing process in the book, and initially went straight to my earliest, clearest abuse. So when a child is sexually preyed upon by their caretaker, that's about as black and white as it gets. It's wrong. It's not the child's fault. And acquiring vocabulary, learning I was not the only one, learning that this plays into a pattern of grooming, all of this was, of course, heavy and hard, but extremely relieving and helpful immediately. It makes sense. I was able to articulate. I didn't feel alone. And it was really going back and giving power to my younger self.
Ooh, that's a good point.
She is me. And so I want to integrate that. Yeah. But it's helpful to look back. Rarely does anyone blame a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, even a 12-year-old. Like, it's not their fault. And so I was able to start giving love and empathy to my younger self. And as an adult, realizing what the proper response was, not to blame that child, not to shame that child, to support that child, to figure out what tools did they need, how, and so now I was stepping into that role. I could become the help and the adult that my younger self needed. That journey goes on. And so after dealing with the initial, like, earliest sexual abuse that I had, there were all these layers that honestly still to this day continue to reveal themselves. And after acquiring really helpful vocabulary to just speak what happened, writing my book and sharing it at the end of last year was a further culmination of owning my story, protecting my younger self, standing up and reclaiming her voice. And now it's the voice of a 30-year-old woman who is in her strength, who knows her worth, and like all of that stuff. And yet I think some of the ongoing struggle is still, you use the word indoctrinated, which I think absolutely applies to me, and is a struggle because where I feel like indoctrination lives, a lot of us think of the brain.
Yeah.
But what trauma does is it actually encodes information like further down, like not in the prefrontal cortex, but like in our lower brains, in our bodies. Our bodies believe things.
Yeah. You mentioned a book in your book that you read that really helped you called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes, I am constantly reading books. Have you read that one?
I haven't, but it's been on my radar.
It is very interesting. And I'm actually, one of the things that I continue to be asked about and I continue to believe is really helpful is, hey, if I have a resource that was helpful for me, it hurts me not at all to share it. And if someone is interested, maybe it will also be helpful for them. And books, I love to read, I love to write. And I continue to do blog posts on my website about the books that I read, basically that saved my life and helped educate me and inspire me. So I will continue to do that. Body Keeps the Score is great. There's a book called Everyday Trauma that I just read recently, which has some very interesting practical things that anyone can do at any time to try to, increase their resiliency to trauma, because that's the one thing we're all going to encounter: struggle and pain of some kind, whether it qualifies as big T trauma or not. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so yes, in my book, there are moments that stand out where someone gave me advice, vocabulary, information, sometimes in the form of a book that absolutely saved my life. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so when it comes to how it's the longest answer to the question of how do I view that now? I'll tell you, this is really of the moment. I'm actually trying a new therapy starting tomorrow, which I haven't done before. And as opposed to all the wonderfully helpful talk therapy, trauma therapy, parts work, all this stuff that I've done so far has included some element of storytelling, talking, sharing with someone. And that has been so, so helpful for me. I think that's the way my brain works. I think that's what my personality really has benefited from. But there's like 100 types of therapy.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, some of these indoctrinated things that I can tell my brain can learn all day long, but my body still struggles to really understand. There are other modalities that it's like having a different tool in your toolbox. Everybody needs a screwdriver. Everybody needs a hammer. Everybody needs all those things. But when you introduce an electric drill, new things are possible. So I'm trying, it's a type of brain, like mirroring. And so I don't have to talk. I don't have to tell stories. It's supposed to give my body and brain the chance when my my mouth and my eyes, my ears are like offline, and it's gonna do some work. So
what's it called?
It's called Saracet.
I think I've heard of this. Okay, I have to look it up after.
Yeah.
Saracet.
So this is real. This is keeping it really real because I'm not trying something that I think is going to be bad. I'm not sure what all the benefits are going to be, but I really just approach my own healing and the rest of the world with a lot of curiosity. I'll try just about anything once, and I feel like I always learn something, even if it's I'm never doing that again.
Right. So yeah.
I think that all that to say, I think it's still a struggle for me to kind of unlearn some of the earliest messages that I was given. And it's been easy to say, oh, well, that criminal abuse was not my fault, because of course it's not. But what about these deep-seated beliefs about roles and God and, emotional safety and bodily wisdom and like all of those things, I think are still a real struggle for me, because it wasn't just my dad that preached that. And it wasn't even just my religion or my society. I mean, it's a question that we ask worldwide and people have a lot of opinions about. And really, pushing all those outside opinions out and sitting with my experience and what I know, and the choices.
Can you give us an example of like a situation?
Sure.
I would love to hear, because, I agree with you. There's things that I had to deal with to overcome my belief system that I was taught from an early age. For example, when I left home at 14, I truly believe that if I were hearing, actually, I didn't believe it at that point. I questioned it, but I thought, just in case, if I hear cuss words, then I'm sinning for not praying for forgiveness at the end of the evening. Just little things like that. I had to work really hard to deprogram, but now I'm far removed from that. I've been away from that situation for many, many years. And yet I still find myself questioning the way we look at the world from the patriarchal point of view, for example. That's a much bigger belief system that we've been entangled with, that humanity's been entangled in for thousands of years. Like, is that what you're referring to? Or could you give us a little example?
I think that is a good example, a question of, to me, like the patriarchy, for example. I learned about the patriarchs in the Bible. I never heard patriarchy used in the way that like a feminist or, a modern person is trying to articulate something. So that's new for me, relatively new. Again, backing up and giving some perspective, raised in one environment until I was 24. I'm 30 now. So it's still, sometimes when I get frustrated about my progress, I have to be honest and say, wow, look how far I've come in such a comparatively
short amount of time. It's only been 6 years. Yeah.
It's a lot of change. It's a lot of change. And in some ways, I don't feel at all like that same person. And yet, one of the things that I strive to do is to make sure that I am integrating and acknowledging that I am that little girl. I am that young adult. I am that young woman. I think coming to terms with the patriarchy, I think, and just the idea that maybe not capital T, capital P, but the idea that systems are built around men having more value, men being in charge, that the women are always supposed to be in supportive, submissive roles. And I guess for me, I get curious from a story point of view, taking it back to where did that come from for me? Like, whether it's embedded in society or not, how did I first become aware of that? And I remember my mom, for example. I mean, this is an early memory. I'm somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. I have quite early memories. And she was telling me that she grew up in, she didn't have a father in the home. Her parents were divorced. She went to a Christian high school. She went to a very conservative Christian college, and she married a pastor's son right out of college. She had, well, all of her kids right in a row, but by the time I'm 4, maybe, she has like 3, 4 kids. They're coming so quickly. And I remember her saying that she used to pray that God would bring her a man like Moses or David, and she would, list these famous patriarchal figures that were always men and were God's chosen. And of course, as I got older and read the Bible myself, I learned stories about some of these men that are held up to be such pinnacles of God's favor and God's power. And sometimes they are also murderers and adulterers and all this stuff.
But they're all men.
And for a young woman, her dream was not to be a leader, a prophet, a hero. It was to be the helpmeet or the serving helper to a man like that.
That's right.
And again, I'm now a young adult looking at that going, wow, that what I was told and my own mother was told was not for us to dream things for ourselves, but to pray that God would bring us a man that we could serve and help and find our identity, and our meaning was going to be like through him.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, talk about patriarchal teachings and
Yeah.
teachings about the inferiority and role of women was really there from day one. And I do not live that way myself. I do not. And yet, how do I make sense of a part of me kind of still having some of those beliefs baked in, even though I've worked so hard to not have those beliefs? I find them to be limiting and I find them to be harmful. And I would never want, if I had a daughter, I would never want any young woman to be, I wouldn't want
limited.
to ingest. And you said earlier the word internalize, and it's one thing to be told something, but not everything we're told we internalize and really accept as truth. And that was a belief that I very much, I think, internalized. And at the same time, a part of me was saying, this doesn't feel right. And so, going on multiple decades, accepting that, oh, yep, this is truth. And then a part of me going, that doesn't feel right. And like, how do you make sense of that conflict within yourself? And now I feel like I've swung the, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the balance is totally in the other direction. I'm now living not in that framework, but there's still this weird little part of me that's like, I really don't know how to fully jettison, I think, this indoctrination. And so I'm interested to see maybe some of these other therapy modalities might help kind of shake that off, because it's living in a place in me that is not really easy to access just by talking or telling the truth.
So you are the one who pulled the trigger with everything with your family, right? You're the one who actually came out and said, hey, this is happening. And it just did that send the whole thing unraveling for you with your father?
I think that is fair. I think the little bit of context, because as you said earlier, complexity is a big factor here. I do think that me telling my story to investigators was what changed everything, which speaks to the power of when we actually open our mouths and say what happened to us. It has such tremendous power.
Huge.
Can have tremendous power. I, for better or for worse, was not the first person that picked up the phone and reported my dad. Where I am with that now in this moment is that I really hope that, I'd like to believe that I was on the path to doing that. I just have a lot of gratitude for the person that did that. It was a friend, it was someone that knew my family, knew me. And I feel like that person was able to do something that I was not quite ready to do myself.
Okay, so you weren't ready yet. You weren't quite there. It was there, like you were talking about it, you were bringing it up, you had written the letter to your mom, but you hadn't quite gotten to the point where you could pull that trigger to tell the authorities.
Right. So the timeline went, I left my family home in early April and got into really good trauma therapy, like in May.
Okay.
In May, June, July, I was doing this really intense trauma therapy and coming to a greater understanding of not just what happened to me and how to heal, but also this responsibility of, this is probably going to go on and never stop. And as much as I would have loved to give my survivor the chance to just go live a new life, it was weighing on me more and more that I probably had a really important role to play in something that only I could do. And I was struggling with like having panic attacks going, no, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. You can't ask me to do that. But knowing really that I pretty much had to. And so it just happened that when this other person made a call, basically a suspicion, they didn't have any proof of anything, but they just said, you really need to look into Toby Willis. I think he is being sexually abusive. And I have reason to think that. An investigation started immediately. And there's some nuance here that I think is really interesting, but in the service of, trying to fit a lot into just one conversation, within like a day, I was talking to TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and they did an amazing job treating this very seriously, working as fast as they could. And they ended up taking part of what I said in that first single interview and made an arrest warrant, and were able to capture my dad. And the other thing here about my story is that another way that I feel really grateful and way outside the norm is that I'm in a position where part of why I can probably speak and feel the responsibility to help others is because I have been given as much justice as our system can give.
That's amazing.
So not the norm.
Yeah.
So many people that had things happen to them when they were young or when they were a young adult, and then they get out of that situation, they are not given the opportunity of having their abuser behind bars, either for life or for the majority of their life. My dad has 40 years in prison that he's working through. And so I don't have to worry about him showing up at my front door. I'm able to make the choice of saying he's not part of this second life that I have, this chapter that I'm in. And that's part of what makes this the best part of my life so far, is to not have that present. So
how is
what changed everything?
Yeah, that changed everything. And so are you happy it happened the way that it did? Like, are you?
I think I'm really, it's such an interesting word. Even writing my book felt like such a happy experience. And yet you could never use that word, right? Because you're talking about the hardest things. It was so, there were times I was crying and shaking and doing all this, but it just felt so right. And I think that I look back and sometimes play the what if I could have just spoken up sooner? Why did it take me 24 years?
Yeah.
And to not waste too much time with regret or worry or blame or anything like that, but to really step into the responsibility of, you know what, I have a chance that, yes, my action figured into, but a lot of it was also outside of my control. And I want to be grateful for everything that I've been given and make the most out of it. And I am very happy now. Yeah. And I look back and just realize that it could have gone so much worse than it went. Yeah. And I think that honoring the past in its imperfection, in its detail, in its truth is really the calling here. Yeah. I think there's a strong pull to make a happy story out of hard things. And in some ways, I think that would be an accurate way of summarizing this, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's never going to be right that my dad did what he did.
Yeah.
I'm always going to mourn that I didn't have the dad that every kid should have. Yeah. But accepting that is what happened was hugely helpful in moving forward. And a lot of times I've just recently been realizing, and I've said this a couple times, but a lot of times we think we want closure when what we actually need is meaning. And so,
wow, that's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Because do you need him to apologize to you, or do you need him to fix something for you, or do you really need did you need the meaning from the situation?
Back to, I think I said this earlier, if we put our safety and our happiness dependent on what someone else says or does, we are at their mercy.
That's right.
We are once again beholden to them. And so last little book recommendation, I read a book called The Choice by Dr. Eva Eger. I think I'm saying her name correctly. And she was a teenager during the Holocaust, and she was taken to Auschwitz and had to dance for Mengele. The story is just incredible. She survived. She went on to live an interesting life. She became a therapist and an expert. And so we not only benefit from her telling her very unique story, but also having a professional reflection of what all that means. And she talked about forgiving Hitler. Talking what do you do with that? How does she get closure from this? That's her story, but this huge, how her story plays into this really complicated, really awful period that the whole world was also living through.
Yeah.
And she talks about accepting reality, and to wish for a different past keeps you locked in the power of that.
That is powerful.
I've really, just sitting with that is whoa. And that that for me was the click over. And I think I can certainly talk about it, but when I felt that shift for myself, all the wishing of what could have been and what didn't happen, and how wrong that was never going to be right, and feeling that the system had given me as much justice as possible, but it still didn't feel like closure. And how much more time am I going to wait? Is he going to apologize? If he apologizes again, does he mean it? What does it mean? And realizing that I didn't want to be waiting around for that, and I didn't want to be beholden to that. And I mentioned again, I'm a singer-songwriter, and I hadn't written any songs or performed in a long time. And this is a couple years after leaving, and my dad was sentenced at this point, and I felt the inspiration and wrote a song called My History.
Oh.
And it was really powerful for me to feel the shift from trauma is so big and you're so small, and it feels like it defines you. And with work and therapy and concerted effort, you can feel this shift of, it's not who you are, it's something that happened to you. It's not your biology, it's your part of your biography.
Yeah.
And to say, the chorus says, all my story now belongs to me. I will try to build a better life for me. No one else will know what I could see. I am my survivor, and you will be my history. And the last line changes to, at the very end of the song, you are just my history. And for me to shift all the images of dad, of family, abuser, all of this stuff, to realize that actually more than anything else, you're just a past part of my story.
Yeah.
You helped give me so much closure, but also was actually making meaning, because now I'm able to make art that speaks the truth with my actual own voice. I'm able to tell the story of what happened to younger me and step into not only being the person I'm supposed to be, but the person that I needed all along. Wasn't someone else. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. I didn't need them to change. I had to grow into who I needed. And the journey of figuring out what that means continues just one day at a time for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You needed to become the adult that you were looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Brand New Day, your album, is so incredible, by the way. I've listened to some of the music, and it's so beautiful. It sounds like it kind of goes with your book, no? Like, are they?
Yeah, they're kind of like twins. I just birthed them 6 months apart. Last year was a really busy year. But I'm coming up on the first birthday of my album, Brand New Day. And I think that, sometimes music can say things that a book can't, and vice versa. So I love having different kind of modalities, different way of expressing my story and my thoughts and my journey. I've lived every word of one of those songs. And I think that they're like two sides of the same coin, because I think speaking our story and including all the hardest parts is one of the bravest things that we can ever do. Straight from Brene Brown right there, another author plug. But then figuring out what to do with this one life that we have, and understanding that every day has so much possibility. And I think we certainly both share hard parts in our story, and so much power comes from having survived hard things and realizing how much strength we have, how much resiliency we have. And no one can once you know that about yourself, no one can really take it away from you.
That's right.
Because it's inside of you. It's not something that you're depending on someone else for.
Yeah.
And having that internal compass.
Yeah.
And then believing in the possibility of every day. And that's what a brand new day means to me. I designed this, I don't know, I'm not sure about tattoos. I grew up thinking they were bad, and I just don't know if I can do the permanent thing. But I wear this, and it's my little logo that I designed. It's half compass, half sun.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's pretty.
That is just that symbolizes and sums up for me the power that I think is inside of us, and then being open to the world and the possibility, and then going out, trusting our path and making the most of it.
There's something about being in your power, right? Just that feeling, I think, only really comes with well, I shouldn't say that because I like you, I had to come out the other side into my power from feeling powerless as a child. But there is something about going from not having your power to having your power
Mhm.
that just feels so, so good, so right,
Mhm.
so fiery. And yes.
And I also don't want to say there's only one way or it has to be hard in order to, because in some ways I hope that my children or my
No.
friends or my
Mm.
siblings never have to go through the hard things. I think that I could have been a resilient, bright person and it never should have depended on going through the abuse.
Yeah.
That being said, the great news is, and the hard news is, nobody really ever gets through life, I think, without having loss or
Yeah.
pain or trauma of some kind. And I think we should be so grateful for the beautiful chapters of our life where we're not having that hardship. But
Mm.
when hardship comes, and it will at some point, to see it as the doorway that
Yeah.
invites us into that bigger challenge that we all share.
Mhm.
Pain is not what separates us and makes us alone. It's what makes us human. And it's really the only thing that we probably all have in common. And then we have to decide what we're going to do with that. We're dealt a card that we have no control over, but we choose how to play that. And that's not always how I saw it, but that's definitely the energy that I live in now.
I love it. Beautifully said, beautifully articulated. And you are the epitome of resiliency. I mean, you have so much power, so much energy, so much positivity. And it's so inspiring to me to see you come out the other side after only 6 years of getting to go on your healing journey and go through therapy and all of that. Very encouraging for all that you've had to work on undoing. And I love that you mentioned that it's probably an ongoing process. I've been doing that kind of work on myself for quite some time, although it took me a lot later to start on the healing journey. Fortunately for you, you did get all that wonderful help and therapy right out of coming out of that situation. It took me many years of going through survival and taking care of myself and learning how to survive. And then finally getting to the healing part, which unfortunately was way too long. And so I think we're coming at it from both different angles. You got to heal early. I developed the scars that made me seem healed, but really ultimately at the end of the day, you have to go back and still do the healing work in order to truly move on from trauma. Because like you said, the body does keep the score, and it was still there. And what happens is it impacts the way you see relationships, the way you see the world. Everything is still being informed by what is going on in the body. So while here you might have rationalized things and said, okay, I've survived, I've moved on. Here, your body still feels all those feelings, and it's still being triggered and reacting from that old programming and conditioning. So I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is healing is the key. Right. You need to deal with what you've been through. And I wish I had that information when I was your age, because healing is absolutely vital. What ends up happening also is if we have children, we pass along some of that stuff to our children because it's all we know. I really wish some members of my family had gotten therapy because I think it would have changed a lot of things. But we can stop it here. Right? We can make the change here. We can make the change with ourselves. And when we change ourselves, when we heal ourselves, we can then be a beacon of hope and inspiration and positivity moving forward for others.
Yeah. And I think that positivity of it's never too late. It's never too early. And rest assured that stuff is not going to go nowhere. It is going to come out at some point in your life, in the lives of your loved ones and all of your relationships. So definitely I agree with doing your work. Sometimes if it's just for the sake of others, maybe that's a way to kind of take the back door in, but ultimately you have to decide that you are worth, this is your one life, this is your one body, this is your one story. And to really make friends with all of your parts of yourself, all of your parts of your story. It really changes your life in every way. So I love that we're on different journeys and paths, but we can still find that resonance and
Absolutely.
that similar energy. Because I think we're both kind of sharing the same message in our own ways that are unique to us and our voices and our stories. And I think everyone has that potential.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned that. And that's why I love doing this show as well, as I get to bring different perspectives on, and, we get to talk about this from many different angles. So yeah, I hope
that too.
I hope that anyone watching this today, you found some inspiration and maybe some great book recommendations as well. But definitely check out Jessica's book, Unspeakable. It is absolutely phenomenal, and I highly recommend you picking it up. I see.
And look at this. It's a beautiful little.
You're too kind, but honestly,
Thank
though.
you.
You're so very welcome. And thank you. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for putting yourself out there like this. Thank you for all that you're doing to help everyone on their healing journey by sharing your story. I think that there can't be enough of us sharing our stories from all of our different perspectives so that we can make this world a better place. Jessica, I also want to make sure everyone knows how to connect with you. So is there a website or a place where they can learn more about their music and more about you?
For sure. Yes. It's pretty easy. I have a website, which is just my name, Jessica Willis Fisher, all one word, .com. And then I've got socials. Those go through periods where I'm going through a lot and I'm sharing a lot. I also, as the work continues, like I'm going into some therapy this week, it'll probably be a quieter week on socials, but I love to talk about the things that are passionate, that I'm passionate about, and the things that have helped me along my way. So if people want to join along, see how the story unfolds, check out my book, check out my album, and that's all at my website. And I'm doing some live music performances and readings and signings and things for my book. So
yeah,
we're planning out hopefully a pretty busy summer. So hopefully I can get around and see some people in person, because I think that's also a really magical, important thing that we can do. It's always the right move to spend some really tangible human time with other humans. So I'm excited to do some more of that.
That's very exciting. And if someone wants to know where you're going to be, is that going to be on your website as well?
On my website as well. Yep. Okay. And hopefully also, in a perfect world, it shows up on my socials. So Instagram, Facebook, sometimes on TikTok. I don't know. We'll just see. But thanks so much for having me. And I think that, just because you're brave and you share your story and you're doing your own work, it's not always met with applause and support and sunshine and rainbows. And a lot of times it gets worse before it gets better. But trusting in the process and finding your people, and you're your first only person. And yet the truth is, so many times we don't have to do it alone. And you never know who life is going to bring and cross your path. So thanks so much for making time for my story and lifting up my story and sharing it with others.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with me, Jessica. Wasn't Jessica's story just incredible? I mean, my goodness, she has been through so much. And at such a young age, she's come so far along in so many ways, but also in her healing journey. And I know she has much further to go, because I'm still very much on my healing journey, and I've been working on it for so many years. And gosh, she's only 6 years into it. And I'm just so amazed and inspired by her and how far she's come in such a short time. But we can all benefit by sharing our stories with one another. I love how she touched on that in our conversation. That's what I hope to do by having these conversations, is just share more of our stories with one another so that we can learn from one another and all heal as much as possible so that we can truly live life to our full potential. If we haven't connected on social media yet, I would love to connect with you there. You'll find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at my handle at Jenna Banks.0. You'll also find me on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Jenna Banks. And definitely check out my website, which is jenna-banks.com. If you're interested in learning more about my book, my speaking engagements, and all kinds of other stuff that I'm up to. So again, my website is jenna-banks.com. Oh, and there you can also sign up for my newsletter and my free email service I call Love Notes to Myself, which is a follow-up to my book. thanks so much for being here today and going on this journey with me. I truly hope to see you again next time. And remember, your love is your power. Until next time.